Have you ever woken up and felt like something was off, not just with the day, but with you? Not in a dramatic falling apart kind of way, but in the quiet, chilling realization that you've become a stranger to yourself. Like you're playing a role so well that even you forgot it was an act. Smiling when you're supposed to, achieving what others admire, following the script handed to you since childhood. And yet, somewhere deep in your bones, something rebels. A whisper, a tightening in your chest, a faint sense of betrayal. But you can't explain why. After all, haven't you done everything right? Imagine this. You're standing on a stage, lights blinding, applause roaring, but you didn't write the script. You didn't choose the costume. You didn't even pick the stage. And yet, you perform flawlessly, because that's what was expected. That's what gets rewarded. Now here's the real question. What if the life you've been living isn't yours at all? What if your dreams were borrowed, your values inherited, your identity stitched together from the expectations of parents, peers, teachers, influencers, each one offering you a mask until your real face faded beneath them? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how do you become yourself when you've been trained to be someone else? You were taught to fit in before you learned how to stand alone. You were praised for obedience before you were given permission to think. You were told who you were before you ever got the chance to ask. And now, you sit in boardrooms, scroll through filtered lives, chase achievements, post smiles, nod politely, all the while wondering, why does none of this feel real? This isn't just a bad week. This is an identity crisis disguised as a normal life. You follow the rituals, career, relationships, social approval, but the meaning feels hollow, like an echo bouncing off walls someone else built. You start to ask dangerous questions. What if I don't want any of this? What if I've never truly wanted anything because I've never been allowed to feel what I want? What if my choices were pre-approved long before I ever made them? And here is the paradox. You can live your whole life being successful in the eyes of others, while dying in the eyes of your soul. They'll call you responsible, admirable, accomplished. But the child inside you, wild, curious, untamed, screams from a locked room. And the more you silence that voice, the more the numbness sets in. Not pain, just absence. The tragedy isn't that you failed. It's that you succeeded at becoming who they wanted you to be. So what now? How do you begin to reclaim a life that never felt like yours to begin with? How do you find the truth when every part of your identity has been shaped to please? You can't just rip off the mask, because underneath it, you may find nothing, no real self, just silence. And in that silence is where the real work begins. Because this isn't just about breaking free. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. So the question is, are you ready to meet yourself finally, fully, and without illusion? Let's go deeper. Before you can reclaim your life, you must understand how it was taken from you, quietly, subtly, with your full cooperation. Because this wasn't a theft, it was a surrender. No one held a gun to your head and said, "Become someone you're not." They just smiled when you were obedient, frowned when you weren't, and offered love with invisible conditions. And slowly, your truth became negotiable. Your authenticity was bartered for belonging. This is the hidden architecture of identity. You didn't choose your mask. It grew around you, layer by layer, forged in the fire of survival. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the social self, the version of you carefully curated to be accepted. It's not fake. It's necessary. But when you begin to believe the mask is you, the soul starts to starve. Why? Because the persona is built to please others, not to reflect your essence. And in a world that rewards performance over authenticity, the persona becomes the prison. From childhood, you were subtly programmed, rewarded for being good, nice, smart, successful. But underneath these labels were expectations. Don't be too angry. Don't be too sad. Don't be too loud. Don't be too real. Each rule carved a part of you away, until yourself became a collection of reactions, to praise, to punishment, to fear of rejection. And so begins the split. The you that shows up in the world, and the you that hides in the dark. Jung believed this disowned part of you forms what he called the shadow, the repressed desires, thoughts, instincts that didn't fit the persona. Not evil, not wrong, just unacceptable to the culture you were raised in. The tragedy? The shadow often holds your vitality, your creativity, your authenticity, buried under shame and silence. And yet, most people spend their lives running from it. They chase happiness while suppressing grief. They seek love while fearing their own power. They perform instead of live. But it goes deeper. Friedrich Nietzsche warned that he who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. We internalize the judgment of others until we become our own captors, shaming ourselves before anyone else can, controlling ourselves before the world has a chance to. We become the enforcers of our own chains, and society loves this. It doesn't need to punish you because you do it for them. Why? Because deep down, you're terrified of exile. Biologically, psychologically, spiritually, you are wired to belong. Rejection feels like death, so you perform. You follow the map handed to you by parents who never knew themselves. You chase dreams marketed to you by a culture that thrives on your discontent. You silence your desires, not because they re-wrong, but because they don't fit the role you've been assigned. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, living inauthentically, denying your freedom by pretending you have no choice. And yet, every day, you choose. You choose the mask. You choose comfort over truth, familiar pain over unknown freedom. But what if that quiet despair you feel isn't a flaw, but a message? What if the anxiety, the numbness, the restless hunger are signals from the part of you that refuses to die quietly? Because the self you buried never stopped breathing. It waits, behind every forced smile, beneath every life you envy, inside every dream you dismissed as unrealistic. And the longer you ignore it, the more the shadow grows. Not as a monster, but as a mirror. It will find you in your burnout, your depression, your failed relationships, your unexplained rage, not to destroy you, but to wake you. Because you were never meant to live someone else's life. You were meant to become something rare, whole. But wholeness doesn't begin with light. It begins in the dark, where the parts of you you've exiled still whisper your name. Now the question is, what happens if you stop running? You might think, if I've made it this far living like this, maybe it's fine. But the cost of disowning your true self isn't always loud. It's not screaming. It's not fire. It's erosion. A slow decay of aliveness that happens so quietly, you mistake it for normal. You wake up not in terror, but in numbness. You smile out of habit, not joy. You chase goals that no longer stir your soul. And when silence falls, you re-left with a question you can't answer. Why does my life feel so hollow, even when it's full? This is the great deception. You don't have to be miserable to be lost. You just have to be disconnected from what's real. Because when you live a life scripted by others, you abandon your internal compass. And without it, you become hyper-reliant on external validation. Applause becomes your heartbeat, success your sedative, achievement your drug. But validation is a poor substitute for meaning. And this addiction comes with side effects. You become reactive. You chase trends, not truth. You become anxious when alone, because silence reminds you of everything you've suppressed. And so you distract yourself. Social media, consumption, busyness, entertainment. As Aldous Huxley foresaw in Brave New World, the future wouldn't need tyrants or violence to control people. It would simply entertain them into submission. And we, numbed by novelty, pacified by pleasure, would willingly trade depth for distraction. You stop asking questions that hurt. You silence the discomfort that might lead to truth. You settle. But the consequences don't stop with you. When a generation disowns its authenticity, it births a culture of imitation. A culture where conformity is rewarded and depth is feared. Where people wear curated identities and call it self-expression. Where we mimic confidence but avoid self-knowledge. Where we confuse performance with presence. The result? Relationships become shallow. Careers feel meaningless. Loneliness skyrockets even in crowds. Because we're not connecting, we're mirroring. Reflecting personas back and forth in an endless loop of performance. Each of us hoping someone will see through the mask first, so we can finally exhale and say, "There you are. I thought I was the only one pretending." But no one goes first, so we all keep pretending. This is the quiet epidemic, a spiritual crisis dressed in success, and it shows up in strange ways. You might find yourself envying people who took risks, not because they're better, but because they're free. You might feel an aching when you see children play, not just from nostalgia, but from the pain of remembering a self you abandoned. You might feel resentment in your relationships, not because people are cruel, but because you never showed them who you really are. So they're loving the mask, not you. And worst of all, you might reach the end of your life with a resume full of accomplishments, but a soul full of regret, not for what you did, but for what you didn't dare to become. Because here's the truth. Every unlived life within you doesn't vanish. It waits, and if ignored long enough, it turns on you as depression, addiction, bitterness, apathy. Not as punishment, but as protest. The self doesn't die quietly. It sabotages your comfort to demand your awakening. It withholds joy until you start asking real questions. It will make staying asleep more painful than waking up. And that's not cruelty. That's grace. Because only when the cost of inauthenticity becomes unbearable do we finally start to seek the truth. So if you feel lost, empty, or chronically unsatisfied, that's not weakness. That's your real self knocking. And it will keep knocking. In your anxiety, in your burnout, in your quiet dissatisfaction that won't go away. It's not here to destroy your life. It's here to save it. But to answer that knock, you'll need to let go of everything that kept you safe but small. You'll need to rebel not with violence, but with truth. Because the real rebellion begins not outside, but within. And once you start to remember who you were before the world told you who to be, the game changes. Are you ready for the rebellion? The rebellion doesn't begin with burning bridges. It begins in silence. In the quiet moment you finally stop running, sit with your discomfort, and whisper the most dangerous sentence you've ever said. This and who I am. That's the spark. The moment you stop negotiating with your own soul. The moment you stop measuring your worth by how well you play a role you never chose. And make no mistake, this rebellion is radical. Because it isn't loud or public at first. It happens in secret. While others think you're fine, you begin dismantling the lie from the inside. You question the script. You ask, why do I want what I want? Who benefits from my obedience? What if everything I called ambition was actually fear in disguise? And when you ask those questions, really ask them, you begin to feel something terrifying and beautiful. Freedom. Not the freedom of endless options. Not the freedom sold by marketers and influencers, but the freedom of authenticity. The freedom of finally becoming indivisible, no longer split between the self you are and the self you perform. Carl Jung didn't believe in comfort as the goal of life. He believed in wholeness, and wholeness requires confrontation with the shadow, with your conditioning, with the parts of you that never fit but always mattered. So how do you begin? First, you stop lying. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You stop agreeing with values you don't believe in. You stop nodding just to be liked. You stop performing small to make others comfortable. And then you listen to the quiet impulses you've dismissed, to the emotions you've labeled too much, to the dreams you buried under practicality. Because buried beneath your persona lies the real you, raw, imperfect, sacred. You may not recognize them at first. They may speak in the language of anger, grief, confusion. But that's not dysfunction. That's resurrection. And when you stop judging what arises, you begin to integrate it. You become more than just the nice one, the successful one, the reliable one. You become whole. But be warned, this will make others uncomfortable. Because when you stop playing your role, you disrupt the entire play. The people who relied on your silence will call you difficult. The ones who fed on your compliance will call you selfish. The ones who never knew the real you will say, "You've changed," and they'll be right. You'll stop attending social rituals that feel empty. You'll stop explaining yourself to people who never truly listened. You'll stop sacrificing your energy to maintain appearances. Instead, you'll build something new. A life by design, not default, not louder, but truer. Not perfect, but yours. You'll start creating art you were afraid to make. You'll speak truths you were afraid to say. You will walk away from roles that earned applause because you've remembered something more important than praise: yourself. This rebellion isn't about destroying your life. It's about shedding the life that was never yours. And from those ashes, you begin again. You start small. You say no when you used to say yes. You take risks that make your hands shake. You follow curiosity instead of duty. You disappoint people and survive. You discover that rejection won't kill you, but abandoning yourself will. And slowly, the numbness fades. The anxiety lifts. The joy returns. Not as a peak experience, but as a quiet recognition. I am finally living from the inside out. You'll still stumble. You'll still doubt. But this time, the doubt won't own you. Because you know who you are. Not in theory, but in embodiment. And in time, you'll stop reacting to life and start creating it. Because the true rebellion was never about escaping the world. It was about escaping the version of you the world invented, and replacing it with something dangerous and divine: the truth. Imagine waking up one morning with no name, no title, no history, no expectations to fulfill, no story to maintain. Just silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of possibility. What would be left? Not your job, not your reputation, not your curated persona. Just you, bare, unedited, alive. That is the moment when the final illusion shatters. You were never supposed to become someone. You were supposed to remember who you've always been. All your life, you were told to build a self, to choose a path, chase success, become something admirable. But the truth, the one they never told you, is this: you are not a project. You are a process. Not a statue to be carved, but a flame to be fed. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. Not by adding more, the same house, the same relationships, but something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer acting, you're inhabiting. But by reclaiming what was lost, by integrating your contradictions, by embracing the parts you were told to hide, every ordinary moment suddenly pulses with depth, because you're no longer absent from your own life, no longer striving to be seen. You've seen yourself, no longer starving for love, you've become love. And that presence, that wholeness, that's what the world needs. Not another perfect image, not another follower of trends, but a soul on fire with its own truth. And when you stop striving to become someone, you begin to become yourself. But what does it mean to live without betraying myself? Not what will they think, but what do I know in the quiet of my being? Before the world whispered, "You're not enough." Not in the future, not after you earn it, but now beneath the noise, inside the silence. You are here to awaken your own. You are not your thoughts. You are not your roles. You are not the approval you chase or the failures you fear. You are the awareness behind it all, the still presence that has watched you play every part, and now quietly asks, are you ready to come home? Coming home to yourself is not an achievement. It's a return to what was always there, before the shame, before the expectations. Here is the paradox. The life you were chasing through ambition, productivity, and perfection was already within you. The wholeness, the peace, the freedom, just buried. And once you truly realize it, the search ends. Not because you give up, but because you finally remember where to look. Not out there, in here. Because the final truth is this: you are never broken. You stop climbing ladders propped against the wrong walls. You stop comparing your path to someone else's illusion. You stop needing to be understood because you finally understand yourself. And in that clarity, life changes. Not in appearance, but in essence. You may still have the same job. And in that presence, everything becomes sacred. Every conversation, every breath. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Because now, you're no longer living for applause. You're living in alignment. So ask yourself, not what should I do, but what is real for me now? Not how do I win? That is where your life begins. Not the life they scripted, not the life they rewarded, but the one that was always waiting behind the mask. So now, take a breath, feel your presence, and remember, you are not here to live someone else's dream.